Hi, this is Craig Blood with the Information Lab, and in this video we're going to take a look at the new level of detail calculation in Tableau version 9. Right now we're using the beta 1 version of version 9, and we're going to connect to Superstore Sales. We are also going to use some other functions from version 9, but primarily we're just going to focus on that level of detail calculation. So imagine the scenario, we want to understand the average order value for this business. I can do that by dragging out order ID onto rows, sales onto columns, and then adding in an average line. And I find that the average order value is $769. Great, I've answered my question. But what about if I wanted to go further, as most Tableau questions prompt you to do? I want to understand how this average changes per state. So let's duplicate the sheet, drag out state onto rows, so that we have one average line per pane. So Alabama is 531, Arizona 462. But this isn't a great visual. Okay, that average is what I'm really interested in, but I'm not really seeing it apart from when I hover over each reference line. What I could do is drag order ID onto level of detail and then wrap this sum of sales in a table calculation. So the window average, sum of sales, and I'm using the new in-pill calculation editor here. Change compute using to be order ID. And I'll find that Tableau is calculating the average order value per state, but every single order has its own bar which is being stacked on top of each other. We can get around this by changing stat marks to be off, but we're still left with 4,778 marks for only 49 states. And if we go to sort these bars, all of those marks skew the sort order. Now, the workaround, let's call it, is to wrap this again in an if function, where we only take the answer from the bars which have an index of 1. Tell us to compute using order ID again, and get rid of the nulls. Great, we're left with 49 marks for 49 states, and they're able to be sorted. If I drag that onto label, we find that Wyoming has an exceptionally high average order ID, order size, followed by Rhode Island, Nevada, etc. Great, we've got the answer that we were looking for, and in this sense it's reusable. I could drag out segment or customer name, and I continue to get the average order values. We're so pleased with this, in fact, that we decide to save it into measures. And publish it to Tableau Server to share around. Now imagine that we are someone who's now come along and discovered this data source and connected to it. And it's great because one of the questions we have is, what is the average order value by state? So we drag out state and drag out average order value. Oh, not quite the answer we were expecting. We only have one bar, and even that isn't giving the correct answer. What this person who's come fresh to this data set doesn't realize, unless they started to dig into this table calculation, is that in order for it to work, order ID needs to be on level of detail, and the calculation needs to be set to compute using order ID. Let's get rid of the nulls, and it'll work again. Level of detail calculations make this problem so much more easy. Let's start a calculation again. I'm going to start from that sales value. And just as before, wrap it in a sum aggregation. But now I'm going to bring in some new functionality, which is the level of detail calculation. One of the functions with this level of detail calculation is to force Tableau to include the order ID in its calculation. So in this example, Tableau is going to calculate the sum of sales for every order ID. The calculation is returned as valid. What's interesting to also note about level of detail calculations is they are treated exactly like row level data. So we can now wrap this again in an average function, not a window average, a standard average aggregation. Still a calculation is valid, and I'm going to call this level of detail average order value. Okay. So once again, we've come to this fresh. We have this average order value measure. Drag out. The average order value is $769. And if you go back to that first sheet, it matches up to our reference line. If we now drag out state, sort, and add those labels, we'll find that those values, 2004 for Wyoming and 338 for Colorado, match up with that complex table calculation we did earlier. 2004 for Wyoming, 338 for Colorado. But in this case, order ID isn't in play. The order ID level of detail has been written into the calculator field. This now gives us much more flexibility in that if we were to start with a map, we can drag out average order value. Let's say onto color. See Wyoming standing out there. And let's say put total sales on size. Change the colors here a little bit. Boost the size of those bubbles. And we'll find that Wyoming's exceptionally high average order value is because there was only one order in the data set. Quick exclude from there, and we've got a much more representative chart. So that is only one of the level of detail calculations that are available. In subsequent videos, I'll go through some other functionality